Oh. Is he not on? Now, good afternoon. Okay. Good to see y'all. I'm going to ask a favor of my friend in the back. You want to just pull the doors too? That would be great. I think we don't have doorkeepers sometimes in subcommittees, and I know we are doing this really fast. That's a good sign for everybody here. I'm Katie Dempsey. I'm privileged to continue chairing this subcommittee and looking forward to it today. I want to thank each of you for coming, everyone on short notice, including a couple of possibly newer committee members. I don't think the list is out yet, but it probably will come out while we're in here. So in a minute, I'll welcome and tell you a couple of the new people that will also be joining our committee. But before we get started, I want to call on Representative Donahue and ask him to start us with a word of prayer.
Thank you, Chairman. Heavenly Father, we come to you and we just thank you for your many blessings. We just pray you be with our families as we're away. Protect them, give them safety. Open our minds to be receptive here, to learn and see the needs of Georgia, to be respectful for the things that we have been blessed with. Lord, we just pray everything in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'll tell you that first of all, so you know who all you're going to want to be getting in touch with about this portion of the state budget. So, as I said, I'll be continuing to chair it. Karen Mathiak will serve as our vice chairman, Representative Mathiak, and I'm not going to call anybody a chairman right now, like I said, because those are not out yet. So I'll just call all of you, if you'll respectfully understand that I'm going to call you a representative just for this one meeting. After that, it will change for sure. Victor Anderson will be new to the committee. He is not able to be here today. This was short notice, like I said, that they were notified. Representative Anulowicz is back with us again. Thank you. Good to see you. Yeah. Representative Matt Barton is also back with us. Representative Mike Cameron will be joining us, but he is not here today. I think they are both. We're trying to cut down on Zoom, as I understand it here, because COVID is in the rearview mirror, so we're going to try to get everybody back here. But like I said, the notice is still not even out, so they were notified with just a few minutes to try to get to Atlanta, and they're not all right here. But they should be listening in, as I understand it. Representative Donahue, who started us off with a prayer, Representative Mary Margaret Oliver, and Representative Stephen Saines will be new to the committee as well. So thank you all. Look forward to all of the help and all the work we're going to do. We were notified, as each of you probably realized, there is a calendar of when we are going to adjourn, when it will be sine die here in the state capitol. So what that means is that budgets have to move very swiftly. So we wanted to get right on the 23 amended. I think we are the second committee. One met at 1 o'clock today, and now we're going to start. Those meetings will move through Friday and Monday. I think we wrap it up, and we'll be doing our best to move this right on over to our friends across the hall in the Senate. So, to get started, before we do, though, I think it is very important that we pause a minute and remember that one of our strong committee members did pass away during this interim. So, Representative Wayne Howard, he was a faithful servant on this committee. We could always count on him being here and being very attuned to the needs of his constituents particularly. And then, of course, the huge loss of our Speaker Ralston. So, as we step in today, let's get started. We're going to hear from several of our agencies, and then at the end there will be time if anyone in our audience also has something they might like to share with us. So first, we're going to call on our veterans, and and I tell you what, because I'm going to let you introduce your team as well when you come to the microphone. We'll turn it on and ask you to. Commissioner Ross, we are ready when you are.
Good afternoon, Chairman Dempsey, members of the subcommittee. I have with me Mark Bannister, who's my Executive Director over Health Memorials, Development, and Finance, as well as my Public Informations Director, Ms. Charlotte May. So I'm excited and happy to be here this afternoon. And because we have so many new members, I'm just going to quickly highlight what our department does, just to kind of level set everything before we go into the budget. Okay, our mission is threefold. We support the almost 700,000 veterans with benefit services through the VA. Again, we're not part of the VA. We are your state agency, but that's for compensation, pension, and a variety of other benefits they earned while serving on active duty in the military. We also have 2 skilled nursing homes, one in Augusta, one in Milledgeville that we support, as well as memorial benefits at 2 cemeteries, one in Glenville and one in Milledgeville. So our population, I thought it was important to look at the entire nation. We have recently, from last year, we were 9th in the nation. We have now beat out North Carolina. We're 8th in the nation for veteran population, again, sitting at about just shy of 700,000 veterans. But in the next two years, we're projected to be 6th in the nation for our veteran population. A little bit about our demographics. Our demographics are trending down just like the rest of the country, but less so than many of our other states. We have the fastest growing population of women veterans. So although our veteran population is declining about 7,000 from the last year, our women veterans are growing. Now, as it relates to compensation and pension, which is what our department helps bring into the state and into Georgia veterans' pockets, we've actually increased in the last year 29%, so a decrease of 7,000 veterans in the state, but our compensation and pension has increased 29% to the tune of almost $3.6 billion into Georgians' pockets. When you look at how we did this past year, and I'm going to relate it to how we did the previous year, and so I'll give you some of those numbers. We had an increase of about 70,000 calls, an increase of 20,000 office visits, that's direct one-on-one veteran services. We had the same number of employees, but actually expanded the number of offices by 5 to include one in the Cobb Mega Clinic, the Marietta Vector Center, Jasper, Zebulon, and in Brunswick. We interred over 500 veterans and their spouses, and we stayed about the same population in our war veterans homes, slightly decreasing mainly because of staffing and also because we are doing some construction and renovation for ADA compliance. And for those who went through the appeals process, when the VA may have denied their claim, we represented veterans in over 1,100 hearings and resolved decisions without having to go to a hearing for over 3,200 veterans. I was asked to talk real quickly about the PACT Act. So the PACT Act is probably the largest expansion of your VA benefits and presumptive conditions for those serving Vietnam and then Gulf War forward, and that's due to toxic exposure. You can see in Vietnam, the big change was adding hypertension as well as monoglyconal gammopathy, and I know one of y'all will correct me on that. But more importantly, expanding those countries where the VA has determined they were also exposed to Agent Orange, to include Thailand, Laos, Johnson Atoll, among many others, and those are listed for you. What's significant about Gulf War forward and the toxic exposure due to burn pits, these are now broader categories of presumptive conditions in cancers. So you can see where it's, head cancers, brain cancers, respiratory cancers, among many others. So how does this impact us as a state? When we looked at our demographics of our 700,000 veterans, about 500,000 Georgians have served during those periods and could be eligible based on developing one of these conditions and their exposure to toxic substances. This would provide not only potential income, disability income for those veterans, but also if they have survivors. And then the VA has made that decision process faster. This was signed into law on August 10th. The VA started processing this on January 1st, but it's now retroactive this year to go back to August 10th. So I was also asked, you approved a suicide prevention and outreach coordinator, and we did get that position onboarded as soon as the fiscal year started on 1 July. and she has been extremely busy. This is a high priority for our department. We have almost 160 trained in suicide prevention. We've reached thousands through outreach events. We were awarded the Staff Sergeant Fox Grant, one of 5 states awarded a grant by the VA, and that's mainly to survey and identify hotspots throughout the state. With that, we have partnered with Kennesaw State University and their Advancement for Military and Emergency Services Research Center to do this GAPS assessment. So what we're calling Georgia Prevention of Suicide, a short assessment so we can identify those when they come to us that are at risk of suicide to get them help. Either if it's not an acute risk, to get them to the right resources or to get them to 988 or 911 immediately. We actually are piloting this right now at 4 offices, and today, as a matter of fact, we're in Canton in a joint event with the American Legion and the VA piloting this survey as well. So let's dig into the budget. This actually is probably the quickest slide that you will see. You'll see our net program was to digitize our DD-214s. What probably many of you don't know is we have almost 600,000 DD-214s. These are your separation documents, that document you need to get benefits from the VA that we have housed in our main office from the late 1970s. Individuals who have chosen Georgia as their home when they have gotten out of the military. This will allow us to create a database, become more effective and efficient to access that information and get them to our field officers, as opposed to if they went the normal route, it's about 6 weeks to try and request them from the National Personnel Records Center. So this is a huge add for us and will definitely benefit our veterans. Also, you can see we had a net loss of $1 million. That's in our cemetery program. As those of you who have been on the subcommittee before know, we do matching grants with the VA and had requested a new cemetery in Augusta. The Augusta community is very much behind this initiative, and that was $1 million matching grant, but unfortunately we did not meet the threshold for the VA. The VA actually is only funding expansions to cemeteries and would have to double actually their budget to about $100 million for us to be on that list. So that will move to the following year, hopefully, and we will reapply for that grant for that cemetery in Augusta, supporting those Georgians that are looking to be interred in that area. And that basically gives us an agency net for the year from our normal budget of just shy of $839,000. Everything else stayed static. And pending any of your questions, that concludes my briefing.
Are there any questions from the members of the committee? Okay. Number
Thank you, Madam Chair. The suicide efforts through the Veterans Department is new this year, correct?
Yes, sir. We got the position funded 1 July.
Prevention, sorry, I didn't highlight that key word. Are y'all coordinating with DBHDD's office for suicide prevention in y'all's efforts?
Yes, we are. We're a partner with them. We also are with their community service boards. That also is an organization, of course, we reach out to when somebody is at risk. So yes, sir.
Thank you.
Could you give me the numbers of your patients at Augusta and Milledgeville, of your nursing home, just so I'll like to look at that trend line?
Yes, ma'am. As of this week, Augusta, we're at 124. In Milledgeville, we're at 142.
And how much is that down?
Okay, we ended up having a net decrease from last year of about 15 patients.
Decrease or increase? I didn't hear you. decrease or increase?
Decrease. 15 patients in Milledgeville primarily. We're at 142 in Milledgeville, and that is mainly because of staffing issues, as well as we are renovating a building again for ADA compliance.
And that is still managed by Pruitt, is that correct? in
Yes, ma'am.
Milledgeville?
We are actually going through the process, the RFP process, to renegotiate for contractors for the next 5 years. That's happening now.
And the medical college manages your Augusta facility?
Yes, ma'am. Augusta University manages the Augusta home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you bring me up to date on staffing of the new Zebulon clinic that I'm on the south side of town, so I'm very excited about having that for my constituents and my colleagues' constituents, but it seems like we're having a rough time staffing. Can you speak
Yes,
to that?
ma'am. I can tell you what I know. I did meet with the Atlanta VA director this week, and we did discuss her staffing efforts that are for all of these clinics. They are, like everybody else, having trouble with specialists. They're not sure. They did a big onboarding event that happened to go very well, but it's taken a while to get folks on board. We do have our own staff member there that's doing claims, our own veteran service officer, but she couldn't give me a projection. She's hoping by the end of the spring for Zebulon, as well as the other new big specialty clinics, they hope to have fully staffed.
Great. Well, I'm very thankful for
Yes.
this clinic.
Are there any other questions? Not seeing any, I want to thank you, Commissioner Ross. The two questions that I had for you, you answered in your packet of information right here. So thank you for a very thorough job for the work that you are doing, certainly to stay in touch with the strong needs of our state's veterans.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll look forward to visiting with you again later
I do as well.
when we visit the 24 budget.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right. So next, Director Chris Wells. Yeah, great. Okay. So with vocational rehab, we'll begin that. And if you'll make sure to introduce any of your staff members that are here as well for us.
Say it again. Okay, is that? We didn't send it. What's going on? Chris Wells, Executive Director for the Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. I have with me Ms. Mamta Patel, who's our Director of Administration, and also I have our Communications Director, Ms. Carla Murphy, here. A little bit about me: I like long walks in the park, moonlit dinners on the beach, and I'm a Taurus. We just wanted to provide just a quick overview of GVRA. We have about 5 programs. Our biggest program is Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. And under the VR program, we offer services for individuals that are seeking competitive integrated employment. And so as part of seeking competitive integrated employment, we work with individuals to try to understand those potential barriers to employment and offer a array of services that will be able to assist individuals sustain and maintain employment. Our next slide is just another overview of our 3 programs, Disability Adjudication Services. So if anybody is for our Disability Adjudication Services, that is a partnership with SSA. We work very closely with them to do, again, disability adjudication, where for claims or individuals that are seeking their disability claims. Again, in working very closely, we do know that there's downward pressures on this particular program coming out of COVID, and we're seeing various concerns just nationally with our disability adjudications program. We also operate the Business Enterprise Program. This is our vending program, so we have vending here in the Capitol. We have vending on a lot of our federal properties, and so in our military bases as well. So our program there works with our blind and low vision population to operate those particular facilities. And then our last program is our GIB, or Georgia Industries for the Blind. And Georgia Industries for the Blind is headquartered in Bainbridge, Georgia. And they work manufacturing. So again, this was created in 1937, and it's a subsidiary of the National Industries for the Blind. Our next slide is just an overview of how our program looks. We're approximately a $101 million agency. In total funds. That could potentially fluctuate depending on services that are rendered. So apologize, the slide is a little off. And then our next slide is just basically our tracking document on page 6 of 7 of the tracking document. You'll see that we don't have too many changes. Our one change is line 28-23-1, and that's GIB, and that's provide one-time funds for an upgrade to our cloud-based ERP system for the Georgia Industries for the Blind. Again, what's happening there is COVID really did allowed us to look at our operations and our systems throughout the agency itself. And so because Georgia Industries for the Blind operates solely on products and sales, we were able to go down and look at our operations from top to bottom and realize that our project costing system and our model that we were using just was outdated. I believe the last update to our project costing model and inventory system was last updated in approximately 2011. So what OPB is providing for the recommendation is $134,000, and that helps us get our project costing, or our ERP, back online. Our next slide is just an overview of the revenue history related to GIB. Again, as you can see, over the last 10 years or so, we've had consistent and constant decline in revenues, and so that was the request for the $134,000. Again, during the COVID, we had a massive downturn. 75% of our products and sales is paper, and with so many different state government agencies and so many different private sectors going into digitizing their documentation, we're seeing a decline in revenue for our file folders, and that was directly impact. One of the more interesting things with the folders that we actually create is it actually is made of Tyvek, and during the downturn, Tyvek was actually redirected to PPE, and so that also impacted our ability to be able to produce our file folders because we didn't have inventory for a couple of months due to that redirection related to the DPA, or Defense Production Act. And so that was one of the reasons why we requested and received $135 to be able to help us. We didn't have any income to be able to come in to help us move forward, to make an investment to be able to move the program forward. Our next slide, a few slides, we'll go through them fairly quickly, but they're just updates based on a lot of the information in the appropriations from this past year, some of the opportunities that we've been able to put in place, and some of the opportunities that we see in the future. One of the things that we definitely want to highlight is we made quite a few changes to our counselors. Again, in VR, our counselors do the bulk of our work. Prior to the changes in March, as well as the salary increases in April, we worked with our federal partners to look at our qualifications for our particular counselors. And we were essentially requiring our counselors to maintain a master's degree to go and work with individuals with disabilities. But we were also losing our counselors to our school system. We were losing them to the private sector, to our risk management agencies that work very closely. And so what we were able to do, and apologize again that the slide is cut off there, but what we were able to do is look at our qualifications, look at what's required, look at what the national average was, and we made an adjustment to our statewide plan that's overseen by our RSA, or our federal partners. And so once we were able to do that, we were also able to take into account the salary increases that was given in April 2022. With those changes, as you can see from the bottom slide or chart, like I said, wish you could see it a little bit better, but we were able to increase our salaries for Counselor 1s prior to my arrival from $27,000 up to $45,000. That is the median. And so what we also did was we took the $5,000, we reached out to our partners at DOAS to basically look at where we were in comparison to our sister agencies, and we've established $45,063 as starting pay for our counselors. These are individuals, bachelor's degrees, 1 or 2 years of experience, but then we also wanted to make sure that we were prioritizing our counselors that went and received their master's and received their CRC, which is a certified rehabilitation counselor, and so they'll start off at $47,316. We also took advantage in 2021 where we established our brand new data analytics team, and we looked at what are those metrics, what are those things that we can objectively measure whether our staff and whether our counselors are moving through the process and they're learning VR. And so we took that information and we developed metrics. And so every month our counselors receive metrics, how many cases they reviewed, and we're able to use that metric or that system to basically do training. It's not a punitive action, it's an accountability measure that we tried to put in place. So it also helps us as managers, helps us as a team to be able to understand what are some of the concerns, what are some of the things that we're seeing. And so we have a salary structure where after a year and a half, 2 years, you're able to be assessed based on those independent analysis that you're provided every month, and you're automatically moved to a counselor 2, automatically moved to a counselor 3. And so looking at FY 2024 or the governor's recommendation, there could be potential where our counselors could come in making $50,000. And again, looking at Counselor 1, looking at where we are right now, $17,000. If an individual was at GVRA in 2019 and just was maintaining, they would be sitting at approximately $45,000 or $47,000 right now. What we also did is we looked at our counselor positions, because that was also one of the critiques. A lot of work, low pay, and what can we do? So we looked at our different positions, and we actually established or broke the counselor position out into 2 different types of positions. So what we did is we looked at our counselors, and we basically said, we need you not only in the schools, but we also need you serving the general population. So we established what we called a pre-employment transition specialist position, and we did look at our Department of Education. And we realized that we had a lot of paraprofessionals that were in schools that were also working with the individuals that we serve. So we actually lowered our qualifications for our pre-employment transition specialists for if you have experience working with individuals. If you have your GED or high school diploma, you can come over to GVRA starting off at about $36,000 and be able to still work in the school system. And so as you can see in FY 2021, we started to experiment and look at that particular process, and we started to see an uptick with the changes in the salary as well as with that new position. In 2022, as you can see there, from 2022 to 2023, when we lowered those qualifications, we had a lot of individuals in the agency that had the experience and the ability, but our own qualifications was reducing or mitigating those individuals an opportunity to move up in the agency itself. So just in 2022 to 2023, as you can see, we dipped down to 22, but we got back up to 34 pre-employment transition specialists. So again, together, that's about 150 individuals splitting the counselor position. So we were trying to basically remove some of the work requirements, increase pay, and as you can see with this particular chart, even though our overall agency headcount is low, we're seeing where we're penetrating our counselors, where we're seeing an uptick in the number of counselors with changing our qualifications, with increasing pay, and also splitting out the positions itself. And I'll move along fairly quickly because I know you guys have a long day. So our next slide is just basically some more updates. Every month, it felt like we were meeting an accomplishment. We were making an improvement. We centralized our call center. Again, during COVID, during pandemic, when you're sending everybody home and calls are going left and right, you're trying to maintain that relationship with your clients, with your staff. And so we realized things weren't working. We centralized our call center. We went from 3 individuals up to 9. We established our own unit, and we're basically not recreating the wheel. We're working with sister agencies. We're looking at best practices, and we're implementing those things. In 2022 or 2021, this committee provided approximately $700,000 for us to move our application online. We went live and active after about 8 months. We did a soft rollout in July 2022, and it became fully operational at the beginning of this particular year. And so if individuals are now looking for GVRA services, they don't have to come into the office. They can, if they're around their table, if they're with their teachers, if they're with a provider, they can go into our system, our referral system. They'll basically go through the process. It'll ask questions. It'll navigate that particular application directly into our case management system. They'll receive a referral number, and if someone isn't in the office, somebody quits, somebody leaves, we have it timestamped so we can track that information from the time they hit submit. Where is it? So when they call this customer call center, we can look in there and we can be able to navigate and at least let individuals know what's going on. And I think that was one of the biggest critiques over the last couple of years that we've tried to navigate and try to work ourselves around. One of the biggest things that this committee provided is $2 million for reopening up our priority categories. We did do that this past July, and we're starting to see an increase in volume of number of individuals that are walking through our doors. And then these are some continuous updates that we're looking at. We updated our network infrastructure. That was completed in August 2022. So we went in every single field office. We updated our ports. We also are bringing in our residential services into our network. For a while there, our network for Roosevelt Warm Springs and Cave Springs was separate. And so when we did an evaluation, we brought it in, immediately saved $100,000 because we were paying for a network that was sitting on top of another network, and so that helped us out as well. The $2 million also helped us provide provider rate increases that hadn't been done in the last 12 years, and so we were able to kind of work on that. We were able to apply for what we call the sub-minimum wage grant. We worked very closely with GCDD as well as DBHDD to be able to apply for this particular grant, and this grant helps us basically work with individuals that operate or own a 14C certificate. And so we're going to work with these providers to try to give them options to move our clients and individual clients out of the 14C or sub-minimum wage into competitive integrated employment. And so the advantage there is we are looking at where we're most popular. We're most popular due to our film industry. So part of our grant application was being able to leverage that relationship and being able to leverage Georgia's economy and be able to provide that as an opportunity. And then lastly, you'll see here our residential adjustments. We're moving to a semester system. We work very closely with the Non-Public Post-Secondary Education Commission, and now Roosevelt Warm Springs as well as Cave Spring Center is accredited. So individuals that are coming into Cave Spring or Roosevelt Warm Springs and they leave, they're going to leave from an accredited institution, and that means a lot. So individuals can look those individuals up, and they'll be able to say, what I have in my hand is an accredited certificate. So we were very happy about being able to accomplish that as well. And as you can see, we're moving to a semester system. One of the critiques that we also had was we had rolling admissions, and with those rolling admissions, it was hard to be able to coordinate with our school systems for those students that were moving forward. And so we moved to a semester system, and that's allowing us to be able to make adjustments. We found out a lot of our programs were based on a 9th grade reading level, and so we looked at 7 key programs that we were already using. We reached out to Best Western, that was using an industry-recognized credentialed program, established that, and so now our 7 programs, the average reading level is 3rd and 4th grade, And so now we can serve more individuals because we were seeing a lot of our population, the average reading level was 3rd and 4th, but our programs were 9th and 10th. And so we were just basically just putting things in a way that wasn't benefiting our clients and creating circles. So these were some of the updates. Apologize it took a few minutes with the slide, but just wanted to provide some updates based on the appropriations from previous years as well as some of the improvements we've made.
Thank you so much. Representative Oliver has a question, I believe.
I'm looking at page 9, your
Yes, ma'am.
staffing, and I'm trying to see if I've followed you.
Yes, ma'am.
You've done some reorganization of how you deliver services.
Yes, ma'am.
But you've cut your counselor staff in half. Are you open for appointments, or in the last year, how often have you had to close for appointments?
One more time. My apologies.
Are you open for appointments, or have you had to close for any period of time for new appointments?
During COVID, we did send our counselors home, and we didn't have the apparatus or that online application because we were heavily based on coming into the office. And so that's why we wanted to invest in that virtual platform. What you're seeing here is just years of just low pay individuals getting other opportunities. When we went through our reorg in 2020 into 2021, it wasn't designed to eliminate counselors. That was a byproduct there. We actually targeted middle management where we just had duplicate positions there. So yes, that squiggly line, that's the total agency population, which includes managers, includes disability adjudication services, and we did lose heavily. We lost about a quarter of our workforce. So we went from about 1,276 down to approximately 900 individuals throughout that.
What's your vacancy rate today?
Our vacancy rate at this particular point in time, I can get back with you, but the last time we ran the analysis for the counselors, it was at 25%.
So historically, when you did have in-office meetings, you were closing appointment options for periods of time. Am I correct about that?
Well, I'm not sure what was happening prior to my arrival, but as I've come into the agency, we've tried to move away from appointments. And what we mean by that is our CSNA, which we have to go through every 3 years, indicated that the biggest barrier for the individuals that we serve is transportation. And so it just didn't make any sense to have 159 counties, only 41 field offices. So people are traveling someplace. And so what we did is we tried to move away from that particular model. Shout out to Ms. Candace Brose and her team allowing us to be able to co-locate in quite a few of their offices. So we're very appreciative of that, which gives us the ability to reduce our physical footprint to be able to invest in technology.
So there's an online process, and then is there a Zoom type interview? Is that how it's working now?
So they can still come into the office on every Wednesday. We do have what we call is VR right for me. Again, one of the biggest critiques that we also had was that you in Savannah, you're in North Georgia, West Georgia, you're getting different information. So in order to streamline that conversation is every Wednesday, I think it's the third Wednesday of every month. Please tune in. We want to get our numbers up. You can listen to the VR process and be able to answer questions live. And so that has also helped and assist us be able to navigate through some of those appointment questions and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope I answered the question. Okay.
Representative Nilowitz.
Yes. What is the involvement at this point with GVRA, with IPSI, with the Inclusive Post-Secondary Education Programs?
We support IPSI. I think when I first came to the agency, there was some confusion in terms of what we can pay for and what we can't pay for. Right now, we do still pay for tuition up to $3,000 and maintenance per quarter. And so there's always a conversation about how far we can go with that. But currently, most of our IPSI programs, and I think Ms. Darcy can be able to probably speak to that during her presentation, is our $3,000 essentially helps for our what we call our pre-ed services. So it's more focused on like work-based learning. It's focused on some of those soft skill type courses. I think our universities, they may charge a little bit more, but we do cover $3,000
right,
as well as the maintenance portion of that, but we still support the IPSI programs.
Yeah, because I know one of the problems that families encounter when they're trying to get their kid in an IPSI program program, whether it's at Georgia State, Georgia Tech, UGA, Georgia Southern, is that these are families that probably haven't necessarily been saving in a 529 because they've probably been told that there aren't really college opportunities for their child, and honestly, that money probably went for care and resources for those children. So it's a funding for IPSI is something that I've been thinking a lot about.
But when you speak to the parents, tell them that we are investing in Roosevelt Warm Springs. We're developing a partnership with West Georgia Technical College, where if individuals are interested and if they need those additional supports, they can actually come to Roosevelt Warm Springs. We can house them there. They can get those additional supports. It's like a college campus. And if they want to go to West Georgia Technical, we have transportation to be able to take them there. So we're trying to look at what's working. Our IPSI partners do a really good job at what they do, but we're trying to basically beg, borrow, and steal and try to be able to provide more services and capacity. So I'm going to put a bug in there for Cave Spring or Roosevelt Warm Springs.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Not seeing any. Thank you so much, Director Wells. We appreciate the work that you're doing
Thank you.
right now. I know there's more at times. There's such great need, so please persevere.
Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. And since you talked about Director Robb, I think it'd be good to bring up with Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities, Darcy Robb, at this time and follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Manulowicz and Director Wells, for the great transition. My name is Darcy Robb, and as of this fall, I am the new Executive Director of the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. Now, at GCDD, we are administratively attached to DBHDD, and we are governed by a council of people with developmental disabilities, of their family members of people with developmental disabilities, and state agency representatives. So our mission at GCDD is to bring about social and policy changes that promote opportunities for the wide spectrum of people with developmental disabilities, and it is a very wide spectrum. Opportunities for those folks to live, learn, work, play, and worship in their communities. I do have several members of our staff here today. I want to acknowledge them over in the back. We have Charlie Miller, our Legislative Advocacy Director. We have Star Bruner, our Transition Director, as well as Lisa Eves, our Senior Director of Operations and Contracts. So at GCDD, as a DD council, there are councils in all 50 states and territories, and we exist due to federal legislation known as the DD Act. And so unsurprisingly, the majority of our funding is federal. Now, a decade ago, you all, the House members, your colleagues in the Senate, as well as the governor, made the decision to begin investing in inclusive post-secondary education, better known as IPSI, through us at GCDD. Now, for those folks not familiar with IPSI, it gives students with intellectual disabilities the opportunity to attend college alongside their peers. We currently have programs at 9 institutions of higher education throughout the state of Georgia, and I can honestly say that these programs are life-changing. One quick statistic on that. Here in Georgia, 58% of our IPSI graduates are employed within 90 days of completing their programs. I would wager that holds up pretty favorably to college graduates in general. And also, if you look at Georgians with comparable disabilities who don't have the opportunity to attend an IPSI program, that employment rate is 15%. Now, I want to also offer an individual story that some of my team and I heard just this morning. There is a young man who's currently a student at the Columbus State Goals program. Now, this young man, in addition to his intellectual disability, really struggled with anxiety. And his anxiety was so omnipresent for him that he had a hard time being in a room with more than one person. Now, he has obviously come a long way in his year and a half in the program. And we know this because, among other activities on campus, he has joined a fraternity. He has had multiple internships at different job sites, and he is looking now to continue his education. So I share that with you all. You know, we all hear a lot of hard stories, and there are, but I think IPSI shows that we are investing not just in this young man, but in the community and all of his fraternity brothers. And I think that is now going to impact their whole personal and professional lives having this relationship. So we want to thank you all very much for your partnership on behalf of GCDD, but even more so for our programs and our students and their families, because we would not be nearly as successful as we have been in IPSC without that partnership and support. Now, in terms of the budget numbers, so starting back in state fiscal year 2014, GCDD was given $100,000 in state funds for IPSI. Now, over the years, at one point those funds moved away from us, they came back. It's gradually increased to $500,000. Now, the bulk of these funds pass through us to the IPSC programs themselves. We also, at GCDD, receive some additional state funds, and that brings you to the total of $577,815 you see on your tracking sheet in item 15.13. Now that, along with the funding from our primary federal grant, which is just over $2 million, that shows that total budget you see on your tracking sheet of $2,596,857. In the spirit of transparency, I do want to also share, and I'm happy to follow up with budget staff on this, is that we do have 2 additional federal grants. Now, these are both short-term and for very specific purposes, and they're not part of our typical funding. But we do have a public health grant for $95,000 and a project search expansion grant for $1.2 million. And again, those are both federal, short-term, and specific. So that almost concludes my presentation for you today. I do want to share that today in the amended fiscal year 23 budget, I would like to ask for your consideration of an extra $100,000 for IPSI. Now, we have been in communication with all of our schools about this matter, and they have indicated some needs for things like technology infrastructure and environmental modification purposes. So, for example, we have one school that has indicated they would like a virtual reality program for career training and exploration. We have another school that is wanting a sensory room. That's one of our larger programs that would really help them. Several requests for just learning technology and technical assistance. We also see a real need to do a quick update on the website for the statewide consortium, and we're wanting to start creating an alumni network site. I thank you again so much for your time, support, and consideration. I know there are a lot of folks on this committee with a real passion for IPSI, and we are so appreciative. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions from the members? I think we're okay. I want to thank you also. You know, we did some look at the IPSI program this past fall. I think we need to do more. I hope that maybe after session we can do some visits, because there is great interest. You know, members have loved ones, but also have so many people within their districts, I think, who are not realizing the opportunities that do exist, these strong programs that are life-changing. So I want us to continue to pursue that and help.
That sounds wonderful. We would love to work with all of you on some visits.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Council on Aging, I believe, are we connecting? But, oh, you're great. Please make sure that we're aware of who is here with you, too. Thank you.
Chair Lady Dempsey, thank you very much for this opportunity, and other distinguished committee members. I'll make everybody happy by saying 4 words. This will be brief. Most people here are familiar with the Georgia Council on Aging, but I'll provide a bit of an overview. We were established in 1977 by an act of the General Assembly, And our role is to serve as advocates and as advisors to the leadership of the state on all things having to do with the elderly. We are fortunate that we are an attached agency to the Department of Human Services. Our council is made up of, let's make this happen. We are a 20-member council. Right now, we're down 4 members, but we're hoping to get those positions filled shortly. The council is, I'm not going to read all this to you, but I do have this information available to you in your packets, and anyone who would like a copy can request it from myself or any of our staff. We are a staff of 3, and my teammates are in the audience here. Our deputy director is Nikayla Frederick. She's been with us for a full year. And our newest team member is Patrice Parker, who has been with us 2 days. And so we're very happy to be fully staffed at this point. We're not asking anything for the amended budget this year. We asked for some ARPA drawdown, some funds to draw down ARPA funds last year, but we're not asking for an amended budget question. However, if you have additional funds, we would like very much for you to consider our advocacy partners. We have the Alzheimer's and related dementia, MemoryNet, long-term care ombudsman. These are all very close partners of ours, and we're always interested in working together to make sure that they have optimum funding, as we do. But the council created the Coalition of Advocates for Georgia's Elderly, which is called COAGE. And our COAGE director, oh, there's our staff. I knew we were there somewhere. That picture of me was pre-session. But our chairman of the COAGE committee is Eve Anthony, and she's going to be doing a virtual presentation to provide a little bit more information on the funding. I don't know what happened. Well, I said it would be brief, so it's going to be even more brief. Amber, I don't know what happened. I didn't touch a thing, I promise. Oh, Eve, are you there already?
I'm here.
Oh, excellent. Well, I will go ahead and introduce you because you're here. This is Eve Anthony. She's been working with the Athens Community Council on Aging for 22 years. She's been a member of the Council on Aging for fewer years than that, but she is a very active and knowledgeable member of the aging community and provides a very important perspective on what's going on across the state with our aging population. And I do want to add that as an attached agency, our budget, what you see on the line item, is we're not asking for any additional funds to operate, but we are asking for funds to help reduce the number of elderly Georgians who are on the HBCS wait list. Anyway, I'll let Eve talk about that. Eve is a graduate of the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. And she holds a professional certification in gerontology from Kennesaw State. So I won't belay her presentation. So we'll just, I'd like to introduce our council chair of the COAGE committee, Eve Anthony.
Thank you, Deborah. And I apologize, I cannot see you all, so I'm kind of going at this blind, but hopefully you all can hear me and see me. But thank you so much, Chairman Dempsey and committee members, for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm very honored to represent the Georgia Council on Aging as the chair of COAGE. And just as a real quick overview, COAGE is led by the Georgia Council on Aging, and we bring together organizations, individuals, consumers, and providers to present, to choose, and then to advocate for aging-specific issues that are important to our state's older adults. So each year, COAGE members submit priority issues from across the state, and then these issues are presented to and then voted on by fellow COAGE members during our annual summer meeting. So 3 policy issues are chosen by the membership as priority and brought to the attention of the General Assembly. Several years ago, COAGE members voted to choose support for increased funding of home and community-based services as a perennial budget request, and that funds services such as in-home support, Meals on Wheels, which I think most people are familiar with, and then also adult day health, among other critical services that maintain dignity and independence. And these services, it's been demonstrated that living at home, not only is it something that most older adults want to do, but it also, living at home with formal support saves taxpayer dollars by delaying or eliminating the need for more costly institutional care. Last year, we were very grateful to receive in the FY23 budget an additional $4 million in funding to support these services. However, what we know is that there's still need for more. There's growing demand for these services. The increase of the cost of providing the service, a growing senior population in our state, and then the lasting effects of the pandemic have increased demand. Right now, today, there are more than 6,000 older adults who are waiting on a wait list. And we believe that one person on that wait list is too many. And although we don't have a request today for the amended FY23 budget, we will once again be requesting an additional $10 million to be included in the FY24 budget. So as Deborah said, my professional role is the president and CEO of the Athens Community Council on Aging. We're a private, not-for-profit, serving 67 counties in Georgia. And so we provide many of those home and community-based services through a contract with our local area agency on aging. And day to day, I'm privileged to see the direct and the immediate impact services such as Meals on Wheels and adult day health offer to our community's frail older adults and their care partners. In Georgia, 1 in 5 adults are caregivers, and 1/3 provide care more than 20 hours a week. And recently, I spoke to the daughter and a full-time caregiver of a gentleman who receives services in our adult day program who is living with dementia. Allison and her father are receiving services because of the increased funding in the FY23 budget. Allison provides care for her father while also working a full-time job. She shared with me how critical the adult day health program is for her and her dad. And she said the program gives her peace of mind knowing that she can continue to provide that care for him at home while maintaining full employment. Home and community-based services provide peace of mind and critical basic needs services to many older adults and their care partners across our state. I look forward to joining my fellow Georgia Council on Aging members and COAGE advocates to discuss this issue with this committee and other legislators in the upcoming months. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you, Eve.
Thank you so much.
All right, I just have one more thing to say, and I was looking forward to the new committee members because I think everybody here is pretty familiar with COAGE and the Council on Aging. But one point that we are definitely stressing this year is the fact that the population of Georgia, 65 and plus, is the fastest growing segment of our population. Currently, 1.5 million people in Georgia who are over 65, and that's about close to 15% of the state's population. So we feel like we have a pretty good market to serve. Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to present, and we will see you for the 24 budget.
Thank you so much. We may have one question here. Let's see, just a minute. Representative Mathiak.
I don't have a question, Deborah. I just want to thank you, and I want to encourage my colleagues to use you in their communities, because when you came to my senior center in Griffin, it was such a delight, not only to see you, but to have all your information for my constituents, and the help that you provided for them was just unfounding, and I'm so thankful.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for coming
much.
to Griffin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the work that you do every day. Y'all are all, even in your newest job, you are doing a great job, so thank you so much. We're going to hear from one more, and then we're going to hear from Commissioner Broche, because I know that all of these kind of fall under your purview a little bit, so we wanted to kind of have that too. So Director Jerry Bruce, the child advocate, if you come share with us a little information, please.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Chairman Dempsey and members of the committee. Thank you for having us here today. We are not requesting any addition to the budget, so we've been asked to give an update on our work for members and answer any questions that you might have. I'm joined today by my Deputy Director, Jen Carreras, who's at the back there, and we'd be happy to serve as a resource and answer any questions and assist in any way we can with child welfare-related issues that you might have. So just very briefly, the Office of the Child Advocate is an ombudsman organization designed to investigate complaints regarding child-serving agencies in Georgia. The main link between us and any other agency is that the child have been basically touched by defects at some point within the past 5 years. So it's a pretty long and broad mandate to look into current and past issues regarding children who are served in our system. So we provide, we're called upon by the statute to provide case evaluation assistance, but also to do policy and practice consulting, education, and system advocacy. And we're really well placed to do that because we see a large number of individual cases that we look into because of complaints that come to us, usually from members of the public, sometimes from folks working in the child welfare world as well. They come to us primarily through our internet portal at www.oca.ga.gov, and we'll talk about the numbers of those we receive in just a minute, but we have a lot of case-specific information. We're sort of up to our necks in the facts of individual cases. But because we see some issues recurring again and again and again, it puts us in a good position to identify systemic issues and to try to address those as well. And that's where some of our education and advocacy efforts come into play. What we really focused on over the past year was reorienting OCA practice, which had sort of moved away from its statutory focus on investigations in the recent past, and we try to bring that back again. So we've refocused on our statutory duties of investigation and ombudsman duties. Our office, when I came in the summer of 2021, was screening out 75% of all complaints that it received, which seemed high to us. So we had a real focus on reducing the number of screen outs and looking into why we were screening out so many cases. Also redeploying our investigative staff into the field. We have an entire agency staff, including myself, of 8. So I don't know if we're the smallest executive agency, but we're in competition for that. And we try and deploy our resources in the field primarily to do investigations, to interview people, to interview defects workers, to interview other agency employees, to interview families who have been involved in cases, to talk to children, to go to courts and to observe court hearings and talk to the parties in those court hearings as well. And then when I first came in, we were doing investigations, but we were not communicating the results of those informations to DFACS or to anybody else. So I wanted to make sure that we began to do that. I'm sure that it was a lot easier for our agency not to communicate the results of our investigations, but we do have a statutory duty to do that as an ombudsman, and so we've begun to do that again. We did ask for and received, thanks to the work of this committee and your colleagues in the Senate last year, an increase for adding some staff and bringing our technology up to date, all of which we have done. We immediately added two full-time investigators when that appropriation became available to us over the summer. We reestablished policy that had fallen into desuetude of contracting with subject matter experts to enhance our outcomes, and also we've never had case management software, and it's been very difficult for us to answer questions about our data without just pulling spreadsheets and counting them on the screen with our fingers. So we launched an ombudsman-oriented case management software and updated our technology as well. The numbers on the following slide are kind of small, and you probably can't see them very well on this screen. But this is just a snapshot of our work in the past year, in fiscal year 2022. I'm sorry, this is actually calendar year 2022. We have the bottom left-hand box is an encapsulation that shows our work from 2019 through 2022. So before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and now on the other side of that. We're at an all-time high in receiving complaints. We're up to, in 2022, we fielded 704 complaints, which was up from our previous all-time high in 2019 of 645 and up from the previous years of 478. And thanks to the ability to hire new investigators, we reduced our time to complete investigations from 118 days down to 80 days, and we're still working on reducing that further given our current manpower. And we reduced our screen outs from 75% of cases that came to us being screened out to a current level of about 41% being screened out. And screened out can be for any reason. The most common reason is that it doesn't fall within our statutory purview. So we don't screen out, we don't do a preview of a case and screen it out because there's no violation of law or policy. We only screen out cases when it just doesn't fall under our purview at all, because a child's not dependent, a child hasn't been served by DFACS or some other reason like that. We also have begun doing audits in certain jurisdictions where we see repeat issues come again and again and again. And so in this calendar year, we conducted 5 audits. One of those is still ongoing. That's in Clark County. But we also conducted audits of Bullock County, Glenn County, Fannin, and Gwinnett counties, which was a labor-intensive process involving individual file reviews and interviews with DFACS staff and other people involved in cases like CASAs and court staff. So we've been really busy over the past year, and that brings me to our case trends. We are finding, as Commissioner Brose has eloquently put in the joint meeting earlier this week, that DFACS is really beset by workforce challenges. It may be that OCA is the only fully staffed agency in state government. I don't know, but we are. DFACS certainly is not, and they are struggling with recruitment, retention, and training of case managers and others for them. And we're finding that to be something that really is having a profound impact on their work. Obviously, if they're not fully staffed, they can't really respond the way that we would hope they could respond. There's also a sort of dearth of available resources right now. We're finding that the agency is working very hard to find those resources and to contract with resource providers, but especially in rural parts of the state, this is not something that's new now. This has been going on for a very long time in my experience in child welfare of over 20 some odd years. Resources to treat folks involved in DFACS cases and other cases in rural areas of the state are always a challenge. And we have found DFACS leadership to be extremely receptive to our suggestions regarding resources and other challenges that the agency faces. We're also seeing a real rise in complaints about the actual court system itself, the juvenile court system, about judges not following the law, about children's attorneys, especially since that's really within our wheelhouse, not advocating for children at all, and sometimes advocating for things that are actually contrary to the expressed interests of the child. And the lack of advocacy, we believe, is adversely affecting timeframes to permanency, because cases that normally would get pushed along by advocacy, kept on the front burner, are sometimes just allowed to languish for a long time because no one is arguing for expedited hearings, nobody is holding the other party's feet to the fire. And so we have really become involved as the Office of the Child Advocate with child advocacy, which makes sense. We have started a quality legal representation pilot project as a way to really address this, and we've worked with Chatham County Commission and the Chatham County Juvenile Court to put this into effect. In 2018, I think the federal government Children's Bureau changed its rules regarding federal 4E reimbursements from the Social Security Security Act and allowed states for the first time to recover the costs of quality legal representation. And based on studies finding that the provision of quality legal representation really does create measurable shifts in children's time in care. Less time spent in care. You may have more hearings up front, but fewer hearings over the life of a case. Less money spent on services and resource because those cases are being front-end loaded and issues are being addressed quickly. So we have a quality legal representation project going in Chatham County that's already drawing down federal funds as partial reimbursements for the cost of that program, and we've had several requests from other counties to roll out that program there. So we're going to be rolling out the program for quality legal representation in other counties across the state as well. We also have, for reasons that are murky to me, a statutory obligation to assist in overseeing the child abuse protocol system, and I very strongly believe that that system is, if not unworkable, very difficult. And we're trying to at least begin a conversation about reform of the child abuse protocol system so that it's more responsive and actually has the intended results in serving families and children who are the subject of child abuse and neglect complaints. So that is a very quick overview. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone in the committee might have.
Are there any questions from committee members for Director Bruce? Not seeing any. I want to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Really, whenever I hear screen out, it concerns me. I think you've probably heard me say that in meetings before,
Yes,
so I thank you for working on that and getting people back into the field once again. I look forward to hearing about the work on the child abuse protocol. I think that is very, very needed and could be very life-affecting.
We'll certainly keep you looped in on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, now, Director Bruce, if you can come share some things with us, please. And make sure, please, to introduce your team that's here with you, because I know they have been.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Dempsey and members of the committee. My name is Candace Brose, and I'm the Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Human Services. I have several team members here. I'll flag for you Demetrius Taylor. He's a Deputy Commissioner in charge of finance, all things finance. Assistant Deputy Commissioner Melissa Barwick. We actually stole her from Grant Thomas over at the Office of Health Strategy and Coordination, and also from OPB. To Kelly Farr's chagrin. She is still very new with us. She's doing a great job. We also have Deputy Commissioner Melody Debussy. We stole her from Senate Budget. She knows where money is everywhere all across state government, which is wonderful for us, and operational efficiencies. And then I have my Deputy Chief of Staff, Matthew Kroll, plus several members of the Government Affairs team. So thank you for having us today. The Georgia Department of Human Services is comprised of three main divisions: Aging Services, Child Support Services, and Family and Children Services, with roughly 11,000 employees and over 230 offices statewide. And I will try to keep my remarks brief as well, so I'll go right into our agency's implementation of new funding that was added in fiscal year 2023. Across that budget, across several programs, you'll see that there were additions in HB 911 for the employee pay raise and the corresponding benefit increases. And I just want to say thank you to the subcommittee and to the General Assembly for their support of those historic investments in our employees. Certainly, we have already seen, just comparing December 2021 to December 2022, a decrease in turnover, especially for many of our frontline worker categories, which is remarkable. And coupling that with some creative workforce development strategies, we really think that we are not only on our way out of the negative effects of the pandemic, but we're really seeing improvements to our workforce challenges. So going to line 2408 in HB 911 under child abuse and neglect prevention, We received $250,000 and executed a contract with the PACE Center for Girls to expand services for roughly 70 at-risk young women aged 11 to 17, specifically in Bibb and Peach counties. These services provide prevention, intervention, social services, and case management. We executed that contract last August, and to date, they have been able to work with 27 young women. Going to lines 2425 and 2426 under child support services. We received an hourly rate increase for our special assistant attorneys general and their paralegals. And right now we have 44 total SAGs for child support services. We went and looked at our records. Even with that increase, which we deployed immediately at the start of the new fiscal year, right now we only have one outstanding invoice, which we got on January 6th, so we're really proud of the fact that we're efficiently processing all of our legal invoices once we get them from the Attorney General's office. Under child welfare services, there were several additions. First, on line 2446, we received $1.5 million for a community action treatment team pilot. And essentially, these teams will be comprised of healthcare personnel and administrative support who will be deployed to treat children at risk of entering foster care or in a current foster care placement in their homes. Over several months' time, we worked closely with OPB and OHSC to develop the right criteria for a formal competitive process, and the Department of Administrative Services published that RFP earlier this week. Procurement closes mid-February, and we hope to get those submissions and execute a contract by mid-March to deploy these teams. On line 2447, we received a little over $450,000 for an autism recognition project in Region 12, which for DFACs includes Bullock, Camden, Chatham, Effingham, Glenn, Liberty, Long, and McIntosh counties. Through her nonprofit, Behavioral Pediatrics Resource Center, Dr. Michelle Zena, a physician with expertise treating children with autism spectrum disorder, and Georgia Southern University, they're screening every child in foster care in those counties, aged 2 to 17, to determine the prevalence of autism in that specific region. This project was approved by Georgia Southern's Institutional Review Board last March, and as of last week, they have evaluated 545 children in the region. They are screened using 2 separate tools, and if those screenings indicate that the child might have autism, Dr. Zena and her staff go through a more formal assessment, and if there's a subsequent diagnosis, the child receives ABA therapy in addition to other services that they would need. And as part of that partnership with Georgia Southern University, they are also conducting some focus groups and surveys to determine the needs of foster parents and case managers caring for children with autism, which will result in several virtual lessons available to foster parents of children with autism. Going to line 2448, we received $1 million to expand respite care options for families with children who have autism, and over the past few months, it was another project where we worked diligently to develop the right criteria to best serve those families, given that they often struggle to find respite care, which can put an exhausted family at risk of DFACS involvement. To ensure the most effective use of the funding, we decided to bid that out, and the response window closed December 8th, 2022. And we have evaluated those bids and expect to award that contract by early February. And we're really trying to develop essentially a new program, so we wanted to have the criteria be as appropriate for what we know about Georgia's children, but also be broad enough that we could really see what was available in the market and not be too prescriptive right out of the gate. So I can tell you what we've outlined is that we would like for the program to provide around-the-clock respite care to families, and we aim to serve roughly 1,000 children over the course of 1 year once we award the contract. On line 2449, we received $200,000 to expand the presence of court-appointed special advocates in our state, and we added those funds to an existing roughly $3.6 million contract with CASA that we cover with state funds and some federal funds. Now, with this expansion and the additional funding, CASA has a presence in 156 counties, expected to serve 10,500 children with 2,700 volunteers, and the funding translated into increases for 30 CASA affiliates already across the state, plus expansion into Henry and Lowndes counties. On lines 2450 and 2451, we received funding to increase hourly rates for our child welfare SAGs and their paralegals. That specific appropriation has an accompanying caption which describes being eligible for the higher rates as long as there is no dependency case backlog. What we did to best determine the process for evaluating that, we worked with the Attorney General's office, SAGs, and the Council of Juvenile Court Judges to negotiate an agreement to really flesh out what we mean and make sure that everyone's comfortable with how to interpret it. And that MOU was executed, I believe it was late fall. Right now, we only have one outstanding legal invoice, which we received 2 days ago from one of our child welfare SAGs, and we have a total of 144 child welfare SAGs across the state. On line 2452, we received $100,000 for vocational training services, which we added to an existing contract with Broken Shackle Ranch for young men age 16 and older in DFACS or DJJ custody. Those young men participate in a program called CREW, and it's 53 youth who are served. They are enrolled in one of 3 trades. It'll be construction, automotive work, or welding, plus the GED program. With the expanded contract, it will go from 53 to 65 to 75 youth served at Broken Shackle Ranch, and that contract was executed, let's see, the additional money was executed June 28, 2022. On lines 2490 and 2491, again, that was a SAG and paralegal hourly rate increase for our SAGs and paralegals that work with Division of Aging Services. We have the same group of SAGs that serve child welfare that also serve aging services, so we implemented that increase. Going to Elder Community Living Services for that program budget on line 2504, we received a little over $1.2 million to create the Dementia Care Specialist program. On November 16th last year, we hired Stacy Hanna as the Dementia Care Team Lead, and we issued funds for all of our area agencies on aging to hire Dementia Care Specialists, with 12 total. Those funds are currently being amended into each AAA's contract. We're working through executing all of those, and it's my understanding that several of our AAAs are already providing these services for the additional funds that they receive, not only in this edition, but in other parts of under this program budget. Unfortunately, just the delay, we hate to see that there's been a delay to actually deploy those funds. It's been a combination of manpower, a lot of turnover in our contracting department, as well as trying to gather the right information to actually write those amendments appropriately based on what the AAA would be able to provide. So we're working through those very quickly, but again, we still need to deploy that funding to these AAAs. For Georgia MemoryNet on line 2505, there was a transfer of an existing appropriation in a different program over to this program budget, and then there was an expansion of $3 million for Georgia MemoryNet. That expansion right now is going through an open RFP process spearheaded by Emory to add 2 more memory assessment clinics. Just for reference, we already have memory assessment clinics in Atlanta, Albany, Augusta, Columbus, and Macon, although Columbus is undergoing some changes right now so that they're not currently accepting patients, and we're working with Emory to see how we can find a suitable alternative. On line 2506, we received an increase of almost $4 million for non-Medicaid home and community-based services. Again, this is part of the contracts that we're working to execute for increases to each of our AAAs, and those are almost completed to have those funds deployed. Under out-of-home care on line 2539, we received a 10% provider rate increase. for almost $28 million to raise per diems for foster families, child placing agencies, child caring institutions, and relative caregivers. We rolled those new per diems out at the very beginning of the fiscal year, and I have a revised rate sheet if anyone wanted to see the changes that we have deployed. Online 2541, we had an existing caption revised to give us more flexibility to utilize $6.7 million to address hoteling, the continuum of care, and preventative services for youth in foster care or at risk of entering foster care. Since November, we have spent $15 million in hoteling costs, and currently we project a total of $36 million conservatively by the end of this fiscal year. So we have used these funds to cover those costs. On line 2542, we received a little over $3 million to increase clothing allowances for youth in foster care. The initial clothing allowance for children aged 0 to 12 is now $311, and it is $415 for children over 13. The annual clothing allowance is the same for all children regardless of age, and that has now been increased to $690. Going to out-of-school services on line 2551, we received $3.5 million for at-risk youth, and $3 million of that we have awarded to the United Way for after-school services, for academic outcome improvements, leadership development, and career planning. The remaining $500,000 will be used to evaluate the effectiveness of the program, working with United Way. We executed the purchase order on September 1st of last year, and they expect to serve a little over 11,000 youth across all 14 DFACS regions this fiscal year. And so now I will very quickly move through the governor's recommendations for amended fiscal year 23. Starting on page 4 of the House budget tracking sheet, line 28.6.1 for departmental administration. The governor has recommended almost $2 million to increase funds for technology improvements and security upgrades to the integrated eligibility system, which is Georgia Gateway. These funds will support one-time costs to enhance security, including multi-factor authentication in Gateway for Medicaid redeterminations, which start on April 1st, and it will allow us to buy technology for more dynamic legal notices and e-communications with current Medicaid recipients once redeterminations start, both of which can't be easily changed in Gateway, which is why we need to purchase the extra technology. On page 5, line 28.11.1, there is $662,433 to increase funds for 80 additional Medicaid eligibility caseworkers. And again, that reflects the need for staff going as we prepare for the start of Medicaid redeterminations, and it reflects 1 quarter's worth of salaries for 80 hires, which we have already secured in recent months through creative and aggressive recruitment. On line 28.11.2, for federal eligibility benefit services, the governor has recommended $5,665,760 with the caption for a management consultant to oversee and ensure quality assurance for Medicaid redeterminations. These funds will allow us to work with a company to review our workflow processes, optimize efficiency, and also help us find new eligibility staff whom they'll recruit, train, and manage through the course of our unwinding activities. And in addition to that, the governor has also designated funding, not in our budget, but I believe through the emergency fund, for an outside consultant to come in and review our preparedness and compliance with federal law before unwinding begins. That will dovetail with the Department of Audits and Accounts independent review of our processes last summer, where they issued a final report, and that's actually a great resource for anyone that has questions about how Medicaid unwinding and Medicaid redeterminations will pan out in the state. Very step-by-step, very good resource for constituents to understand, so I wanted to make sure to plug that. It is available online through DOAA. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Representative Oliver.
What is your current vacancy rate for CPS?
The answer to that is nebulous, unfortunately. So in DFACS, operates its personnel management in a different system than most other agencies, including the rest of DHS. So in that particular platform, there's never been a reconciliation between funded vacancies and unfunded vacancies, which is something that we're actively working through right now with some of our new staff, especially Melissa Barwick's team. So I would not be able to give you a straightforward answer on that question.
How do you measure your turnover rate among CPS?
We don't measure it very well right now because we have to go through and do a reconciliation.
In relation to this consulting contract at 28.11, this is a 23 budget item, the $5.7 million?
Yes, ma'am.
We're in month 7 of 23. Have you already let this contract?
No, we have not yet.
So you're going to spend it all between now and June?
We believe so. We've already talked to some potential vendors, and we know the appropriate way to secure the services. So we believe that we will be able to quickly execute it.
Is it an emergency procurement rule, or do you have to bid it?
It would not go through bid unless we were directed to do so, which we could, but they're either through statewide existing consortium contracts or statewide contracts through DOAS or association contracts. We could do it through those vehicles.
So a non-bid contract for 5 months for $5.7 million?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
So you're saying it's a non-bid $5.7 million for 5 months?
That is a possibility, but we would work closely with DOAS. We have right now with DOAS dozens of open procurements and procurements in the queue. So, of course, we would want to work with them to make sure that we're compliant.
It's likely you'll want to follow up with me on the question I've got about Kenny A. The last monitoring report shows a real uptake in the hoteling numbers, and you're aware of that. But
yes,
can you tell me in the budget where the full cost of the Kenny A money is in the budget for all the attorney fees and all the monitors and all of the expenses? Do you know that number, or can you follow up with me about it?
I'll follow up with you because I think we have it fairly handy, but I don't want to misspeak.
Right. And who is the attorney representing the state at this point on the Kenny A case? Do you know?
Jamie Thoreau.
Okay. Are y'all going to ask to be dismissed from that case?
We were making excellent progress in so many of the outcomes that it was something that was under discussion. Of course, in recent months, we have fallen behind in some of those metrics. At this point, I think what we're trying to do is to make up those losses. We were really excited to, for the first time, actually meet an outcome that we had not previously met for the graduation rate of youth in Region 14. But at this time, no, I don't believe that we have those plans because we want to make up lost ground.
I was a big proponent of the match committee and very happy about how that's, and I met with some people this fall, as you know, trying to kind of look at how that might work. But all of the issues that you set out fairly strongly the other day really seems to put a lot of the burden on match committee. Have you funded match committee to solve all those problems that you asserted?
Well, no, ma'am. It's certainly something that we would be willing to discuss because the person that we've designated to be our representative on the match committee is a 20-something year DFACS veteran that remembers the days of the old match committee, and she was very involved in that, so it's been wonderful to have her serve in that role. She is also the person in the role that we created to handle complex youth, specifically hotel youth, because of her expertise. She's a licensed clinical social worker, so it's something we would be definitely open to doing, especially if we could utilize some of our federal funding for it.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going. I mean, I really am concerned about helping. I want match committee to work, but if we're not giving them any resources to solve these problems about the judges ignoring orders and what you told us, all of those bad things, it just made me a little nervous. So let's follow up on that.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Are there any from the committee at this point? So I want to thank you particularly. It's an issue that we've talked about for many, many years, but for the continued work with the SAGs and for sort of the, I would say, the way that has developed and become more functional for them. I know you know what a key issue they are to finding children better placements and better permanency often at times. And also this committee here, when you listen to what Commissioner Broche was saying, you know that many of those measures are things that we were all very engaged in deciding to fund. So you should be very proud of the work we did last year and the year before that as well. The clothing allowance is huge. It's still low. There is no doubt. And, you know, I think we need to continue to revisit that as an encouragement and also just as a goodwill measure for children. So we'll continue to do that. Thank you so much. And thank you. I know it's a bit of a long afternoon, but thank you for listening with us to some of the other people that spoke that fall under your umbrella, because I feel like if there are questions that come, then you're aware of those too as well, Commissioner Broche. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to your team as well.
Thank you.
And so now we will hear from DBHDD Commissioner Kevin Tanner. And Commissioner Tanner, if you would please introduce your team members that are here too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Introduce our team members. I told them out in the hall that I appreciate the committee saving the best staff for last. And I will tell you, I obviously had opportunity to work with this staff as a legislator, but since I've been in this role for a month, I am convinced we do really have one of the best staffs I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So Chris is our CFO at the department. Actually, Ms. Price, our former CFO, longtime CFO, just recently retired, and Chris took that position and does a tremendous job for us, and that's why he's sitting up here, because he knows all the real answers. And Michael, I think most of the committee knows Michael. Michael was trained in the House under Chair Lady Dempsey and others, and does a tremendous job leading our legislatively as our legislative director. And then Ashley Fielding, who many of you know, I'm sure. She has been around the Capitol for a long time, from between DHS and is Assistant Commissioner, handling our external affairs, internal affairs, and also all of our in charge of our legislative team. Just does a tremendous job. And then Chelsea is with us, Chelsea Nabrit. You remember her from being here at the Capitol, and she's now on our legislative team. And I don't think Patrick's in the room. I think he's tracking testimony at another location, but we also have Patrick. So thank you. Appreciate you giving me that opportunity, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity today also to come before you to provide you an update on the governor's proposed amended 2023 budget, as well as a few programs updates that have been requested by your office. First, I want to take a moment to focus on DBHDD's #1 priority from last session, and that was the state hospital workforce. Those of you who were in the joint committee hearing saw a few of these slides already, but for those who didn't get a chance to hear these updates, I will cover them briefly. As many as you know, about 80% of our workforce, which is 4,600 strong, serve in the DBHCD operated psychiatric hospitals, so it's 80% of those. These hospitals provide recovery-focused services for Georgians with chronic mental illness and who are at the highest level of need for acute and long-term inpatient care. More than 2/3 of our hospital beds are reserved for forensic patients, meaning a primary responsibility of our hospital system is to get people well enough so that they can stand trial for a crime they've been charged with, or so they can return to the community after being adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity. What you see before you is a picture of the impact COVID had on our hospital workforce and therefore our ability to carry out these important responsibilities. Most of you are aware of what COVID did to the healthcare workforce generally, but for DBHDD specifically, our system experienced a net loss of more than 1,200 hospital employees between January 2020 and June 2022. DBHDD was able to keep hospitals open despite these losses by bringing in contracted agency staff from Jackson Healthcare to fill key healthcare roles. This support was due in large part to the department's partnership with DCH and the blessing of Governor Kemp to use ARPA dollars to augment staff for our hospitals. And since those funds have expired, DBHDD is now self-funding the full amount, which totals approximately $1.6 million per week. This committee in particular saw the need to invest in the highest turnover positions, and because of your advocacy in the FY23 budget, you made a $24.5 million investment in salaries for our hospital employees. On the right side of this slide, you'll see the results of that investment. After 30 consecutive months of net loss in our hospital workforce, we've had 7 straight months of net growth. This is encouraging and even more significant because it helped us bring back former employees who had been dedicated to the department's mission but seemingly left for low-paid wages. In fact, 25% of the people who have come back to work for the state hospital since June are former employees of DBHDD. We are gaining the most traction in non-clinical direct care positions and hospital support functions like food, service, and housekeeping. Of the hospital employees we've had added to our headcount since June, 208 were health aides, certified nursing assistants, or other non-clinical direct care workers. Our progress here is steady and has allowed us to reduce our reliance on Jackson Healthcare by 25% since June. This slide shows how the pay package and the increased ability to recruit has enabled us to serve more Georgians. Some of you recall last year's budget language directed DBHDD to bring 45 state hospital beds at Georgia Regional in Atlanta and 47 beds at other state facilities online by November 15, 2022. As you can see on this slide, we've been able to open up 90 beds across the hospital system since March of last year. This number fluctuates a bit on a daily basis based on a variety of factors, but for the most part, this progress in opening beds has been a steady climb since July. But to be completely transparent, this increased capacity is more reliant on the support of Jackson Healthcare than what we would like. Though there were targeted pay increases for clinical positions, nurses are still proving to be very difficult to recruit. We have only been able to add 37 nurses to DBHDD's headcount since June, and because nurses are critical to the oversight of the care environment in our hospitals, this is an area where we still rely very heavily on Jackson Healthcare. Of the $1.6 million we're spending weekly with Jackson Healthcare, about $1.1 million goes toward staffing nurses. My priority is to replace these resources as quickly as we can with DBHDD employees who are not just more cost effective, but who also demonstrate a better commitment to our mission at DBHDD of serving Georgians. To quote our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Rigsby, "You can run a psychiatric hospital with mediocre doctors and good nurses, but you can't do it the other way around." I think even the doctors among us here today would agree that that's true. Moving on to our mission to provide home and community-based service supports to Georgians living with an intellectual developmental disability. Last session, you made an historic investment in 2 Medicaid waivers DBHDD administers, the new Options Waiver Program called NOW, and the Comprehensive Supports Waiver Program referred to as COMP. We utilize these waivers to enable more than 13,000 Georgians living with a disability to remain in their homes and in their communities. But we know of at least 7,000 Georgians who need these supports or will need these supports sometime in the future. The Governor and General Assembly recognize that need, funding 513 waiver slots for this year, which is more than any year in recent history. In that appropriation, you also gave us money to bring back some of the administrative staff DBHDD had lost in the 2020 budget reduction. This has helped us enroll individuals at a steady pace and will help make sure that we fill all newly funded slots this year. And you can see from the chart that we need to average approximately 42 per month to be able to meet that goal, and we're well on the way to making that happen. We're proud to be able to fulfill that promise, but we also are keenly aware that the workforce shortages in our system are making it difficult for Georgians who are entitled to our services to access them. Reimbursement rates for now and comp are out of date, and they are limiting the capacity of our network. When we don't have enough providers, or our providers reduce the footprint because of an inability to recruit and retain workers, we have to face the heartbreaking reality that Georgians who need this specialized care and support cannot simply find it. In extreme situations, this means people end up in an emergency room or other settings where they don't belong for weeks, while DBHDD staff work around the clock to locate providers who can support them back in their home or community, and you as legislators receive those phone calls. As of yesterday, our staff were working with community hospitals around the state to find placement for 27 people with disabilities who were stuck in ERs for non-medical reasons. We must address these workforce shortages on a systematic level so Georgians can access the quality health care and community support they're entitled to receive. We're in the middle of an important step toward that systematic workforce solution with our NOW and comp provider rate study, and it will serve as the foundation for our efforts to stabilize our provider networks. This work is a priority to me and our department over the next several weeks, and we'll be meeting with you to dig into the details of what we're seeing in our preliminary reports and what we've heard in our public comment period, which actually ends tomorrow on the 20th, and what you can ultimately expect in the final report. After the public comment period ends, we will consider that input in our final rate study, which should be completed in March or April. So I encourage you, if you're getting any phone calls from providers, encourage them to submit that feedback as part of that public comment period, which ends tomorrow. Along the way, however, we intend to keep this committee as up to date as we can throughout the process. Here's what we know preliminarily. The early report suggests provider revenue should increase by 40% overall, and the impact would vary by provider based on the services they deliver and based on the needs of the specific individual they're providing service to. It is important to remember that this is just draft recommendations, and the public comment period will inform the final report. In addition to the NOW and comp provider rate study, I also wanted to provide you an update on the rate study for behavioral health services that you funded this year. Current rates for behavioral health were set in 2008 based on data and wages from 2007. So to say this is long overdue is an understatement. Currently, the preliminary report is under development by DCH. Once this is completed, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services must review and certify. We expect to share a more accurate timeline of the rollout of this in the coming months, but it will be important to addressing some of the workforce challenges that I've covered in the following, we'll cover in the following slides, and I want to take a moment to thank the Governor, this committee, and other members of the General Assembly for recognizing and committing the resources necessary to fund these studies and the investment you've made in helping us with our workforce. Now I want to take a moment to talk about 988. As a reminder, DBHDD, as the state's behavioral health authority, manages the state crisis response line, oversees mobile crisis services, and operates 620 crisis beds for children and adults across the state in partnership with community service boards and other providers. For those of you who missed the information in the Joint Committee hearing Tuesday or who haven't had a chance to attend one of the department's webinars on the topic, 988 is the new 3-digit dialing code for anyone experiencing a crisis involving their mental health or substance use. In Georgia, these calls are answered by the staff at Georgia Crisis and Access Line, also commonly referred to as GCAL, which is managed by the department. And because this number numbers easy to remember, Georgia call volume is expected to double once marketing for this line begins later this year by the federal government. This will mean all of the downstream services like mobile crisis response and short-term stabilization will be affected as our call volume increases. I will talk more about that in just a moment. Although without widespread marketing, GCAL has seen more than a 10% increase in call volume since it went live in June. A few of you saw this map in the Joint Committee hearings on Tuesday, but I think that it's worth showing you. What you see here is where our crisis calls are coming from throughout the state, and we've adjusted it based on population. When you do that, rural Georgians and South Georgians in particular have been calling GCAL 988 at a higher rate than their counterparts in Georgia's metro areas. This is not a huge surprise for those of us from rural areas. It also tracks with the fact that what we've seen in suicide rates around Georgia, specifically in rural areas of the state. And we know about access to outpatient care and stigma associated with mental health care in rural parts of Georgia. Now, as you saw in the previous slide, Georgia has been able to manage 988 and its demand so far. But it is important for everyone to understand, to meet our current projections of 988, we will be building out every aspect of our crisis system over the next several years. With federal marketing starting this fall, we are expecting call volume to increase even further, and we have to be ready so that we can meet the demand for this service when it comes. I've said it once, and I'll say this again, there is no wait list for people in crisis. We must be there for Georgians when they are in need. What 988 offers is a promise of life-saving health care to Georgians experiencing mental health or substance abuse disorder. But it will be up to us to fulfill that promise. While we're on that topic, I want to take a moment to talk about the impact of recent investments that you've made in the state crisis continuum, most of them in preparation for the rollout of 988. Even before 988 went live, the state was experiencing a tremendous increase in demand for crisis services, beginning with the onset of the COVID pandemic. On the left side of this slide, you will see how GCAL call volume has increased year over year since 2020. GCAL initially struggled to meet that demand, but Georgia invested $7.3 million in technology and staff over the last 2 years, including $1.5 million in state funds, and as a result, we have saw improvement in call volume. GCAL's average speed answer has dropped from more than 200 seconds just in 2020 to less than 10 seconds today. Tremendous increase. Next, I want to briefly touch on mobile crisis response services as we talk more about the presentation on the governor's proposal for FY24. For those of you who don't know, mobile crisis is essentially a service dispatched by GCAL when they determine a clinician needs to respond to a behavioral health crisis. Generally, these clinicians travel to the individual, help de-escalate a crisis situation, evaluate the person experiencing the crisis, and depending on the circumstances, can connect them with outpatient treatment and appointments or crisis observation or stabilization. We've had a nearly 40% increase in demand for these services over the last 3 years, and response times have crept up alongside that demand, especially in rural areas of our state where clinicians are having to drive longer to access those individuals. DBHCD used about $500,000 in federal funds to expand the reach of these clinicians through telehealth over the last 2 years. This is an area we have prioritized for investment this year so that we can continue to fulfill the promise of 988. The third category of the response in the crisis continuum speaks to where people go for care when they need short-term stabilization. This year, we will bring 43 new beds online in high-need areas, thanks to the funding you all provided, including 16 med-psych beds at Grady, which will fill an important systematic gap serving individuals with medical needs who are also experiencing a psychiatric crisis. Very difficult population to serve. We anticipate with 988 we will need to build many more crisis beds, and we will be moving forward with a recommendation from the Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission to conduct an outside study of bed capacity needs, both for behavioral health and IDD crisis, so we can better quantify what types of beds we need and where those beds need to be located, and that's going to be getting started very soon. Again, workforce is critical to utilization of our crisis capacity. While building out these beds and services to meet current and future demand will remain a priority, this is another area where workforce shortages due to burnout and non-competitive salaries are hampering our ability to serve as many Georgians as we need. Georgia currently has 546 crisis beds for adults and 74 crisis beds for youth across the state, but between 15 and 30% of those beds are offline on any given day due to shortages of nurses and other staff who are necessary to provide quality care and patient safety in a crisis environment.